right, welcome everyone to Water Stories, photo tips, compelling visuals, and storytelling techniques from the We Are Water project. So my name is Claire Ratcliffe Adams. I am one of the PIs for the We Are Water project. My pronouns are she, her, and we're joined here today with a few members of the project team. So we have Dylan from the Space Science Institute, Anna Marie from Ceres, and our guest speaker for the day, Lianna Nixon. We also have Beatrice Chavez in the chat, just a shout out to another one of our project team members. But thank you all so much for being here today. I see a number of you are from the Southwest of the United States, and that is really where the heart of the We Are Water project is. So We Are Water is all about connecting communities and sharing stories through our connections through water in an area where water is scarce. So this is a collaboration between scientists, Indigenous science educators, learning researchers, informal educators, and library staff. We've been working on this project since March of 2020, and we're coming up to the final months of the original proposed project. But this is just a brief glimpse into the many partners that have been working on this project for the last 4 years. And I'm really excited to announce that we did win the Colorado Governor's Award for High Impact Research for this project. We just got that last week. So this has been just really exciting, a wonderful way to connect with cultures across communities and all of our shared connections through water. The We Are Water project includes a traveling exhibit that goes to public and tribal libraries in the Four Corners region. It is currently on display at Ignacio Public Library in Colorado just through the end of this month. And then next it will be going to Page, Arizona. I think Anna Marie put in the chat, it will be there starting on November 9th. So if you're in the area, it will be there for 4 months, finishing out this project and carrying out into what we hope to get approved as a no-cost extension so we can keep this project going and connect with more libraries in the region. The project serves Indigenous, Latinx, and rural communities and connects communities through conversations and explorations about water. This multicultural traveling exhibit features text in Navajo, Spanish, English, and Ute languages. And before Ignacio, it was at Zuni Tribal Archives in New Mexico, and they were able to translate some of the materials into Zuni language as well. So yeah, a celebration of cultures coming together. All right, so today's facilitator, we have Lianna Nixon. She is an educator, filmmaker, photographer, and a member of the We Are Water project team. So I'm going to turn it over to Lianna, and we'll learn about how to, create really compelling stories all about water.
Thanks so much, Claire. I'm gonna stop your sharing and get on over here to our presentation. Okay, so I always get this wrong for where we start the slideshow. I do apologize. There we go. So welcome everybody. As Claire said, my name is Lianna Nixon, and this is Water Stories, which means that we're going to talk about photo tips, compelling visuals, and storytelling techniques. So Claire already talked a little bit about We Are Water and this amazing project, and I just highly recommend, whether you live in the area where the exhibit has happened or will be happening, to check it out, as well as our website that has some really incredible conversations and podcasts about what water means to communities in the Four Corners regions of the Southwestern United States. I also wanted to just start contextualizing our talk here with our land acknowledgement. Where I work, which is University of Colorado Boulder, this is ours, and we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's Boulder's campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. And we further acknowledge that there are 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to these lands that comprise of what's now Colorado. And I do want to extend that also to just the Four Corners regions that we're going to be talking about today as well. So this is our little plan for today in terms of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more and why I'm here and why you're seeing certain photos that you are today. We're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker to just really start thinking about storytelling and then gear up into the foundation of really creating and making good photos, right? Which is like building your story. We talk a little bit about these engagement techniques and photo tips when it comes to capturing water. And then we're going to talk about some responsible storytelling practices. Now, Dylan has kindly made that link bank for us, and we're going to be using the Padlet that is linked in there. That will be our activity that we're going to be using throughout our presentation here. So, and just one quick little thing before we dig in is that this presentation is actually by something called Making Presentations That Stick. It's something that I designed for science storytelling. So a lot of these themes show up in it, and I highly recommend that you take a look at it. And there's a Google Doc handout that does a storytelling workshop in it as well. And the visuals that you are seeing was given permission to me by Effie Yazzie, who's cooking in this photo here, and a project that I am working on in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park with her and her family, as well as the other residents, called Setbi, or Within the Valley. So a little bit more about me and why I've got a camera while I'm driving a Zodiac right there in that photo. I've been a conservation photographer and filmmaker for about 10 years now, mostly starting off with wildlife photography. That's what my family has done throughout my lifetime, and that's what I fell in love with first. And then I realized that I was really interested in storytelling that focused on the intersections between people and planet and how we are really interconnected, and these different kinds of issues relating to climate science are super important. I really like using art science narrative work, so creating compelling media tools or visuals to talk about science, and counter narrative, which is more of a educational activism approach, thinking about whose voices are being heard and empowered in a story. So why do we need storytelling? Why are we all here? Well, many of you are from the library community, so you are all most likely surrounded by archives of stories passed down from generations to generations. And these are just 4 of my favorite reasons why storytelling is needed and important, but there's an infinite amount, right, that all are just as meaningful and important no matter what. So stories create impact. They can help inspire, educate, motivate, and change depending on how you're facilitating your story. It's the oldest form of how we synthesize and retell and transfer knowledge from one person to another. And that's what I love about We Are Water, is that it is like at its core about transferring knowledge about water in this specific region. They help us engage and tackle very complex discussions. Maybe it's about water, maybe it's about climate science, depending on what it is. It can also be allowing us to openly approach topics that can be polarizing or difficult to talk about if people have different perspectives. It allows us to be open to how to, grasp these much more difficult things to think about. And stories are seeped in community, right? When we think about that transferring knowledge, it helps us expand our knowledge, and it helps us also maintain things that we have learned, and we continue learning from them. So we're going to start off with our Padlet icebreaker here. So if you guys can, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second, and we're going to get into our Padlet. And I want us to think about a story, a nonfiction story. That could be an article, a TV show, a podcast, anything really in particular that has made an impact on you of some sort. It could be memorable or just interesting. And if you can please post it in this little column here that says icebreaker, We're going to take 2 minutes to or 5, to take a little bit to think about some of these stories. This is a really interesting story about addiction. Very all right. I'm really these are great so far. And what I think is so awesome about the Padlet is that we're gonna export this and make sure that you guys have it. You already have the link to it. So we can continue looking at these pieces of why they might be interesting, relevant, or compelling. And I thank you all for sharing this. We'll take another minute here and then we'll continue to move on. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for who's posting. And I know some people are still answering. And as I said before, these are all great. And I'm sure that a lot of these have, are building blocks of a story that make them compelling or interesting in some sort of way. And I just go over these little foundational blocks, because what we can do within an exposition, inciting incident, action, climax, or conclusion, can really help make or break a good story, right? So our exposition is really about setting our scene for our audience and drawing them in. When I think a lot about projects, especially ones that are related to Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park right now, it's really like seeping in what is the place like, what does it look like, what does it feel like, trying to transcend those characteristics in that exposition. Then we have the inciting incident, which is our movement of our story. This could be if we have a subject or a person that we're really focusing in on. This could be, kind of getting a little bit into their life story or who they're like, a first impression, or maybe it's about a certain issue about water rights, and we're kind of starting to look at the historical aspects of it. Then we go into our actions, which is the meat of our story, and where we have all sorts of events or things that take place that help contextualize really what you want to talk about. We get to our climax, which is our highest point of the actions. It's either when actions are resolved. For scientists, we call this our like findings areas. We also have our important messages or key parts of our stories that are kind of in this area. And then we get into our conclusion and final outcomes, where we tie up loose ends, to return to certain themes that we're focusing on, call to actions, or any takeaways. And so these building blocks, no matter how basic they are incredibly important in how we set the tone and how we guide people and navigate people through certain stories. Thinking about capturing water, that's one of the things that I have been challenged and tasked to tell you. So water can be incredibly challenging. It's challenging when the absence of water is really felt. But I also think it could be the most interesting. And there are numerous ways that I have been exploring to capture water or have studied from other people. And some of the ideas and ways in which we can capture water and think about it is, where is it exposed and where is it hidden? It's great to take a picture of a lake or a body of water, but also it can feel stagnant sometimes, those landscapes. So where is it hidden? For example, where are there a lot of trees in like a place that seems like an arid desert, because there's obviously water underneath where those trees are getting that moisture from. Or there could be a place where somebody has a well that you think is like really just out of all places, you're surprised. Another aspect of capturing water that I think about is where it is changed, where there's more of it or less of it. This is especially apparent in the Four Corners regions, especially the Colorado River has been experiencing mega drought, right? So we do see the absence of it. But at this, so a story that I really like that from Effie, Yazi, who is the character in a lot of these photos here, who's in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park. She talks about how water has changed often. And she took me to this, it looked like just a clay pit that has been dried up. And she said that there used to be a lake there, and that's where her parents had made pottery when they were younger. And now they can't anymore because there's no more rainfall in that, or significantly less rainfall in that area. And so taking a photo of what kind of seemed to be an eyesore of a very dry area actually meant a lot. It had a lot of different meaning and holding in its past and how it's changed. There's also more of it in some other regions, and maybe you don't presently see it, but sometimes different flora and fauna that come to different areas are ways to show that the water has changed and maybe there's more in a certain area. For example, in Colorado, I had seen a new kind of wildflower this year from all the rainfall that I hadn't seen in a really long time. And that just was something that represented that there was more water in that area. Another thing that seems very straightforward is its physical aspects and characteristics in different states. Water, it has its three states. It's the most, it's solid, liquid, and gas. It's got characteristics, the way that it is used, not just for drinking, but also for cooking, also for cleaning. Those are great ways to show how it's being used. Its physical aspects, not just showing its translucency or coloring, but different textures, how it plays with other elements, like that dry lake I was talking about, being able to have, a horse footprint really stuck in some mud from a long time ago that's been dried up, could just kind of show a little bit of a different physicality of it. And then I think when you're in a place that can be challenging to capture water, the biggest thing is to show the stakeholders of water. And so it's not just people, but it's also the animals, it's also plants. Those are all really important things to show that water is foundational in any ecosystem that you enter, right? And water is life. I have found through my own storytelling career that if you give water a face, it becomes more tangible for people who are not aware of different water issues that are happening in this region. So, for example, I have friends that who live in Denver, turn on the water in their kitchen sink, and they know that that's where their water comes from. But for, people like Effie's family who have to haul water when it's really hot out 3 times a day, takes about an hour a day to do it. And showing that it gives this different perspective and asks you, where does your water come from? So here are just some examples of what I think a water story would be like in the context of, spending time with Effie and her family. So here's Effie Yazzie, and right in the background, that dirt pile over there is, that's Dry Lake. And it's been really carved into, and she's telling us the story about when her mom used to make the pottery in that area. And they also they grew their corn not too far away because they were able to have some irrigation related to it. Where water is hidden is this photo on the top right corner, where we have these desert cottonwoods and junipers, and it is hidden because, right, the trees are going into an area where they know that they grow there and are alive there because there's more water. The bottom left corner shows Effie washing some wool. So it's characteristic of being important for cleaning. She does a lot of weaving with her own sheep wool. So it's important that she cleans it. And she uses a tub that also her ducks bathe in. So they get it after she washes the wool, so that she's conserving as much water. And then the one on the bottom corner there, that's Tim, her son, who is actually collecting water from Pine Spring, which is the photo of the view above. That's one of the places where they have a massive cistern where they can haul their water. And he's a stakeholder living there with his mom. So camera techniques, can you guys write in the chat, if you are a photo user, if you're using an iPhone or DSLR or any other device for me quick here. All right, so both DSLR, iPhones, woo! We've got some Canon Rebels in here, awesome. Both are great, and I had originally designed I had originally designed this slideshow for an iPhone or smartphone in terms of accessibility, because also it's nice to share those skills with people. So I'll talk a little bit more about, ooh, the EOS 5, Tracy, very nice. I'll talk about both. So the top little bit here is what I thought was applicable for both smartphone and DSLR. So for camera techniques, your exposure and lighting are going to be so important. In desert regions, I found that if you're not up within the first few hours or taking photos at sunset, your light gets really harsh. And that happens for both iPhones and DSLRs. And so, being sure that when you do have good light, to always take advantage of it. Always thinking about and checking your exposure makes a good photo, or it can make a very bad blurry photo, like I have taken so many in the past. So this photo of Effie here on the right is a great example. Her hogan has very minimal light, except for in the afternoon. So in the morning, it's great to go in there and photograph her because of the light source coming from the east. And that is all natural directional lighting. On your iPhone, you can actually manipulate your exposure of your light when you click on the subject, and there's a little sun right on the right side of your little square when you click on your subject or wherever you're photographing, and you can drag that up and down. You also can play with your settings, within the little, oh, this isn't working great. Oh, and that's my face. Just like within this little menu that you can drop down, right? So another thing is a timer, add yourself in. I like subjects. Landscapes I think are amazing, but I do love subjects. If you're going to capture a story, you can get a landscape, you can get a body of water, but if it's something that means something to you, add yourself in it. Smartphones have built-in timers, and you can just act like you're collecting rocks on the side of the lake, or maybe you're drinking water, or maybe you're picking flowers. I don't know what you're doing, but if you're doing, include a subject, it creates more interest and it brings that face to water and story. Perspective is super important, not just in photography, but also in film. The height that you place your camera at is going to help guide and facilitate a different experience. So when we're really high above the ground, like drone footage or something like that, or just even taking our phones and reaching as high as we can, right? We are getting more area that we can cover, right? We're more of a bird's eye view, we're really far away, but that also can be distancing. That's a great shot for, if you're doing a photo story around a certain place or region, getting a general landscape from far away, a higher up position, has us look at a distance, but then we can move in later, right? So just being mindful that when we pull away focus, we're creating a little bit of that distance, but it also can help us contextualize ourselves in a place. When we're close to a ground, taking pictures of wildflowers or any flora, or maybe bugs or, small critters that might depend on water, that's great. But then the rest of the world around us, right, is so much bigger. So we're really closed in, and we're really narrowed into a certain subject. And this is great for our transition of moving in. But also remember that then everything else around us seems so much bigger. It's almost like a child's perspective, right? Looking at this big, big world. And then at normal height, just whatever height you are at, I call it normal, it should be just your height, really keeps us at the same perspective and plane within the story, right? We're able then to just kind of co-facilitate and guide people through this way. So this photo of Effie here, I'm going to just point to this again as my example piece. I'm a little bit lower because I wanted to get this big world of the Hogan that her sons had built around her. And this is where she does a lot of her weaving, and she's sharing one of her favorite pieces that she uses while weaving. And so that's just an example of a perspective change. I wouldn't have been able to get, the different layers of the logs going up to the top, and that important connection from Father Sky to Mother Earth. Also thinking about wide angles versus zooming in, right? The iPhone, if depending on what you have, can have those 3 different lenses, and those are really important and also can help us with that big world or vast landscape kind of styles. And this is also important with DSLR. The wider that you go, distorts more photos. And so unless you correct it in post-production, you kind of have this fisheye looking kind of lens kind of thing that happens. And I don't personally like that too much for taking photos of people or animals. That's something that I actually had to learn over time. That was a big rookie mistake of mine, was making sure that for you DSLR users, being at least at 24 millimeters for subjects that are people or animals is what you want to do to not distort your subjects. Portrait mode is also something that has happened on iPhones, right? And this is kind of what it would equate to of having a very low aperture. An aperture, which we'll talk about in a little bit more depth in a couple of minutes, is when there is more light traveling into the camera, which makes the focus smaller and compares the focal distance smaller. So not everything, your background's going to be blurry. And this can be interesting if you're trying to focus on a person or a certain object, and just trying to isolate them from something, just to get something kind of nice. Maybe this could be a headshot piece that you need. But this is just one way of also taking a nice photo and just having one person in focus. So choosing your focus. And then finally, the rule of thirds, which is so important, and something that I actually get stuck with even as a seasoned photographer, is often that we like to put the subject smack dab in the middle of our photos. And Effie currently is basically pretty much in the middle of this photo. And that's great and all, you're capturing them in the center, but sometimes the rule of thirds can help us and the viewer, look at the photo in a different way. So for example, my background, I used the rule of thirds here. We have the landscape on the lower bottom of the third, this line, and the other 2/3 are all sky. And so it makes it look really, really vast and large. And that's what I wanted. I wanted that feeling of openness. Whereas if I had the landscape all the way up here and tons of foreground coming down, I'm really focusing on the dominance of that landscape. Now, if I have somebody that's more on the left-hand side, it's going to give more breathing room, and the eye is going to travel from the subject center point and out, and it creates that movement. So these rules of thirds are really important in directional movement that you can create in a photo. So I talked about a little bit of iPhone and some DSLR tips here, but here's my quick DSLR tip, or the single one that I put here. If you're new to a camera and just need to ask, what are your settings? I do get this question a lot. The magic number for aperture priority, which is what I like to use, because I focus on the focal distance and lighting rather than speed, unless there's a really fast moving subject. F8 is the aperture that is the most efficient for your camera and lens when it comes to light travel. And you generally get most things in focus here. So I always say F8 is great, and we throw it and then we're done there. But the smaller your number is for aperture, the more light comes in and the less that is focused because your focal length shrinks. And so that is great if you're wanting to focus on like a single flower, and you kind of want to blur out the rest of the landscape. But, or if you have, for example, this photo of Effie, I think was at F16, because I wanted to get everything else in the background relatively focused. I wanted people to feel like they were visiting her hogan. Your ideal ISO is between 200 and 400. And this is just for the lowest amount of, noise. And depending on your camera, it will have a threshold of when noise gets really bad. So for mine, I have an R5, which is crazy, but I found that at 3200 ISO, I still am pretty good. But on my old EOS 5 that I did have, but it was like the 5D Mark II, something like that. It was really 1600 ISO. And then anything after that, I was starting to see a lot more noise. And then of course our speed, our time value, or it depends on our subject. If you do aperture priority, you're not manually changing your speed, but if you are interested in doing time value, the slower time speeds are better for landscapes, more stationary things. The greater speeds, let's say between 1/200 to 1/400 is great for people or animals walking. 1/25 is great if you have somebody sitting for a portrait, allowing enough light to come in. But play with that as depending on the speed of your subject or something that you're capturing, or if you're in motion. Like I took this photo while I was in a truck, and yes, it was very light out, but I had to make sure that my speed was fast enough to capture that in stillness. So I did only ask you guys about, what kind of camera you were using, but not necessarily your medium. But for any audio and video people out there, I just want to just touch on that all of these things are really great. I find that people who have done photography and moved to film actually get a hold of really great filming concepts when it comes to setting up a scene and everything like that. And my greatest advice to you, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, is one, time lapses, which you can also do on your iPhone. It is a photo format that turns into a film, right? Those are really powerful when we want to show, maybe moving clouds or, rainstorms coming through, or just people visiting. Maybe there's a line of people hauling water somewhere. I have seen that before, and setting up a time lapse for that to show how busy it is for people hauling water is interesting. I do have to say there's not enough content out there about capturing conversations about water and traditional knowledge and your own water stories. And I highly recommend that you just continue doing that, whether it's a voice memo or a film or anything like that. And then finally, make sure that your audio is clean. This is a rookie mistake I've done before, but if you are doing any filming, people tend to be more okay with bad visuals than bad audio. Bad audio, people, when people hear it, they become more annoyed if there's background noise or it's more distracting. Whereas if your photo is not it's not the most optimally lit, or you kind of have some stuff going on in the background, people will end up focusing on whatever you're trying to focus on. So those are just my camera techniques that I think have been most helpful when it comes to capturing water, thinking about perspective, and our rule of thirds, and setting up our shot, our lighting, thinking about our settings, and then of course, going into audio, video, thinking about those techniques and having clean audio. So another thing that I wanted to share is responsible storytelling. And I feel like with this workshop, so many of you already probably know what responsible storytelling is, but I always find it important to talk about. I think in my experience, it's the foundation to all powerful stories, and it's built on trust and respect with your community stakeholders. It's sustainable because it's sustainable in the aspect that involves active participation from the stakeholders of your story. Historically, photography has has exploited many communities. I know for a fact, Effie Yazzie, for example, her family she's been one of the most photographed women in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park and hasn't seen 90% probably of the images taken of her, maybe more. So when we're telling responsible storytelling, when we're using responsible storytelling practices, we want to always think about that we all have our own personal biases when it comes to certain subjects and topics, just because of the way that we have grown up. And it is our job as storytellers to know what those biases are and ensure that we can ask ourselves the questions that help us ensure that there is no bias in our story for proper documenting, right? So asking ourselves who or what is being centered, are we perpetuating harmful narratives? Are we falling into certain narratives? And if so, what are they? Are we falling into certain stereotypes or putting our subjects into those? Do they feel empowered? Do they feel in their vulnerability? Do they feel empowered? When we tell stories about people, not just about even about ourselves, it takes a lot of vulnerability. Also, responsible storytelling tackles complex issues, and we have to figure out ways of compressing that without losing authenticity. I often find in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park, even just as an outsider looking in and trying to understand a lot of the water dynamics, is that it can quickly become complicated. And at the same time, you don't want to simplify something so that it can look good on a poster or a news article or something that completely takes away any other important meanings or stories or narratives about people or the place. So another thing is power dynamics. Just always remembering that when we have those biases or thinking about who's centered, that means that voice is being empowered in that story, and we have to ensure that it's being done in a right way. So I'm going to share with you for as an example, a small video that I've created called Water Holds Memory on this Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park story. It is for SETB, which is a project that is fundraising for water tanks and different sustainable off-grid stuff, but I will save that for later. It's totally different, but just letting you know that's the context of the story. It's a co-production of knowledge with Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park elders and community stakeholders, mostly Effie. For this piece, it's a counter narrative, so it's not coming from the park, it's coming from a resident. It intersects hydrology, so really thinking about water and climate sciences with oral storytelling. And it uses intersectional environmentalism, which is an activist framework when we look at climate and environmental science. Jeremiah, I'm going to actually answer this question here before I go into it. Jeremiah gave a great question. How do you come to know these biases? In what ways, what processes do you work to expose your potential biases that limit in your work? So that's a really great question and a really hard practice. I do a lot of journaling and storyboarding. So when I do my storyboarding and journaling, I also research different things so that when I am approaching a question or a subject, I figure out what I know, figure out the information around it, and then I figure out, in this way, I guess I think about if there's any narrative. Claire, I just saw you appear.
Yeah, I want to add, yeah, great question, Jeremiah. And, I invite others to share how they do this work in the chat. But, this is something since the start of this project, we're keeping that in the forefront of how we develop all of these educational materials, resources. Part of what we do is we have advisory boards that consist of the community members in the communities that we are working in. And so we co-develop the activities, the designs with them. We did a needs assessment in each of the communities, before we even started working on the design of the exhibit, because I think, that's something, it's an everyday work, especially for those of us in privileged positions, to constantly be going back to that and checking that. And what we did with the library staff in the professional development when getting them ready to host this exhibit and do these types of projects with their communities is we had a lot of open discussions about, identifying our biases, questions about, how do you as a library staff respond if a patron comes up and has problems with any of the content in the exhibit. We tried to make this as not controversial and as not political as possible, but that is impossible when you're talking about water in the West. This is an inherently fraught subject with a tragic history of water rights being taken away from people who lived in these places before. So we do have a panel that addresses that a little bit about the inequities, about how water is inequitably distributed in the Four Corners region, especially for Indigenous and Latinx communities. So we know we're not perfect. It's one of those ongoing everyday work that we do, but an excellent question that you bring up to remind us always to come back to that, and keep doing this work every day.
I don't have anything else to add to that, Claire. That was beautiful, except you should find yourself a community partner if possible. That also comes with responsible storytelling, right? Is that you are partnering with the community to co-facilitate and tell a story. So another thing is like with Effie's family, for example, I always show them everything that I do before I actually publish. And I do that. Her daughter has a smartphone, so I just text her to ensure that that's okay and correct. And also any other posts that I make or something like that, depending. It's reviewed by her so that I know that I am telling her story correctly. But yes, there is always going to be those complications and we're not all perfect. So I'm gonna play this quick for you guys.
We're living in a park. It's a tribal park. It goes way back to my ancestors. My mom used to say, I used to climb on top of the mesas and look for water up on top of the rocks. And these are the rocks that has big holes on top, and it look like a big swimming hole. I noticed that nowadays that a lot of my people will be living closer to a spring, so they will have water to haul it back and for their drinking water. It's about, let me see, about I would say maybe 3.5 miles. With my mom, she's getting old.
And so a lot of the things that I worry about now is the water. I really want people to know that, yes, this is a sacred place. This is where one day I want my niece to live here. I want her to live peacefully to where she's going to just live a good life here.
Shoot, sorry. So that was it. Sorry, I always can never. So I just wanted take your time. Actually, I think I would like to just run into questions here really quick. But in the Padlet, there's a section for final thoughts about something that you'll be taking away from this talk, and I highly recommend that you fill that out, and that would be wonderful. But thank you guys so much. I do have a story challenge sheet for you that's also in the link bank. And it's just a PDF about certain challenges that you can do for yourself. I want to add now, thanks to Jeremiah's questioning about a bias checklist, thinking about that. So that'll be a bonus. But thank you guys so much. Any questions?
I have a question for you, Lianna. What is like your favorite part about doing this type of storytelling?
Think it's learning. Honestly, just it's been really transformative in my own life to at least learn about Effie's story in her life. I actually met her through a family friend who does backcountry horseback riding tours with her, and she's the guide in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park. And it took like 8 years for that person to find out about Effie's story about lack of water and whatnot, but also just like understanding the resiliency of people. That's been a wonderful thing to learn as well. You know, this project in particular, no one's asked for it or a handout or anything like that. It's just something to help with quality of life, but they're incredibly resilient, and she's got a great laugh. I don't know, just learning about other walks of life is my favorite.
Awesome. What would you say is the most challenging aspect? I've heard some folks who do a lot of video editing just say like it's the editing, it takes so long, or is there any what's the biggest challenge that you face in creating these projects?
Definitely editing as one of them. That's a huge one. You can storyboard so much and then things change. Even if it's just a photo story that you're taking, how you produce your images, it does take a lot of work in how you set a story. For example, articles or magazines and stuff like that will only have 10 images. And for a project that can be so complex, especially around water, that could feel nearly impossible. I think another thing is building trust, especially if it's not your story. Building trust is challenging, mostly because it takes a lot of work in being vulnerable yourself. And I know for the residents in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park, they've been burned by a lot of different people who have been like, I'm going to tell your story. We're going to bring, the equipment that you need. And they don't follow through. So it's ensuring that trust and that sustainability is hard. Yeah. Jeremiah, your research is extractive for sure.
Yeah, that really echoes a lot of what we've been trying to build with the community members. We have we've really been trying to focus on reciprocity, as the opposite of extraction, like, hey, we want to do this project. We want, like, can we take your time in your community and you give this to us? It's like, how can we make sure that this is a project that benefits the communities as well? And we've had a lot of lessons learned, and especially with starting this whole project out the first year of the pandemic and not being able to go down there in person to build these relationships and show them and build that trust. It has been a big challenge, and we're still working on that. And we hope to continue to build those relationships even after the project is done. And we're trying to find ways to keep supporting the communities so that this isn't just over, in December when the funding is over.
Yeah, that's huge. And I also do have to say storytelling over food has been one of the most successful things. I think offering and sharing meals is super important. And that's actually been the most meaningful to Effie's family, having them over for and just talking and sharing in that way, that more intimate way, right? Whereas COVID made that challenge. But yeah, keeping that sustainability of after funding, I'm sure that's going to be a huge challenge.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lianna. I really appreciate you sharing your process and your beautiful images. Makes me want to get out there and take more pictures and share stories through visual storytelling. And
Well, thank you.
Another comment, Lianna mentioned co-production with community of important questions, of needs, of possible solutions, etc. Super important for building trust and maximizing impact of the co-produced work. Absolutely. We really, it's our goal to give the voice of this project back to those communities who we're working with.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We'll stick around for about one more minute if there are any more questions. We will be sure also to post the recording on our StarNet webinar archive page. We'll probably also put it in the link bank. So if you've saved that, it'll update, in the next couple of days with the recording if you would like to revisit this or share it with any of your colleagues.
Yeah, and please feel free to email me too if you guys have any other storytelling questions. There you go. Some contact stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Lianna's email is also listed in the link bank.
Oh, perfect. Then I'm going to stop my share then. Oop.
All right. With that, I'm going to stop the recording, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
All right.